On our third wedding anniversary, I received Ethan Carter's divorce papers. He slammed the papers down on the dining table while I was in the kitchen heating his milk. My apron still dotted with oil splatters from frying his eggs that morning. He glanced at me with a frown. His gaze like he was looking at some annoying, unshakable piece of old furniture, annoyance mixed with pity. Sign it. He uncapped his fountain pen and set it next to the papers, moving like he was signing a business contract. The house is yours. The car is yours. And you get 70% of the savings. It's a good deal. Don't make a scene. I didn't make a scene. I just stared down at the agreement. On page 17, under property division, he'd clearly listed our marital home registered in his father's name, even though $30,000 of the down payment had come from my mother selling her house. So even though he said the house is yours, I'd actually get nothing. As for the 6-year-old Corolla, there were still 18 payments left on the car loan, with over $2,000 in interest each month. He'd hired the lawyer. He was the lawyer. My hand was steady when I picked up the pen. When I married him 3 years ago, I thought I was marrying love. I later learned I'd married a charity cassette, been poor once. So he knew exactly how to leave the wife who'd built his career with him with nothing. All without breaking the law. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning at the Los Angeles County Clerk's office. He grabbed his car keys. I won't be home tonight. I have a work event. Okay. I pushed the signed papers back to him and smiled. He froze for a second, probably surprised by how calm I was. In his script, I was supposed to cry, scream, and hysterically demand to know what Layla Voss had that I didn't. Then he could sigh like every other successful man, tired and defeated, and say, "Look at yourself now," shifting all the blame onto me. But he never got that chance. He left with the papers, closing the door softly, like he'd just dropped a heavy burden. It only took me an hour to pack all my things. In this house I'd lived in for 3 years. Everything that actually belonged to me fit into a single suitcase. Clothes, a few books, a 4-year-old set of skincare products, and the blessed Lucky Charm my mother had gotten for me. As for the cookware I'd picked out for the kitchen, the curtains I'd chosen after visiting 3 home improvement stores, and the rose bushes I'd grown from seeds on the balcony, I probably thought they were as worthless as everything I'd given him. I left the keys on the shoe rack by the front door, took one last look at the house, and dragged my suitcase out. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. It was a private room at a restaurant, the table covered in seafood and red wine. Layla Voss was sitting on Ethan Carter's lap in a burgundy slip dress, holding a glass of wine and smiling seductively. The caption was a line Ethan had written to her, celebrating our new beginning. Starting tomorrow, I'm all yours. I glanced at it, then hit delete. Not just the photo, I deleted the sender's number and every single one of Ethan's contacts. Facebook Messenger, phone calls, social media. 3 years of messages, gone in 3 seconds. 3 years of love erased from the digital world in 3 seconds. My best friend Jade Miller yelled at me for 10 minutes straight on the phone, then drove over to pick me up. When I tossed my suitcase into her trunk, she said I didn't look like someone who'd just gotten divorced, I looked like someone who'd just gotten out of prison. That's exactly what it feels like. I reclined the passenger seat and closed my eyes. I'm free. Jade ruffled my hair and said nothing as her beat-up Mini pulled out of the apartment complex. I glanced back at the building with its lit windows. For 3 years, I'd looked forward to coming home here every night. Now, looking back, those lights had nothing to do with me anymore. I slept soundly through the night in Jade's guest room. No more staying up until 2 a.m., waiting for him to come home. No more suspicion when I smelled unfamiliar perfume on his collar. No more lying awake at 4 a.m., staring at the ceiling in despair. I slept straight through until morning. Not even a dream. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. It was a landline number I recognized, the East Side Police Station, right below Ethan's office. He'd called me from there once, 3 years ago, when his phone died after working late. That was 3 years ago, back when he'd still borrow a phone just to let me know he was safe. I answered. A middle-aged man's voice came through, flat and matter-of-fact. Like he was reading a work report. Is this Ms. Mia Bennett? This is the East Side Police Station. Your husband, Mr. Ethan Carter, passed away from a sudden heart attack at approximately 3:40 a.m. this morning in room 1806 of the Azure Hotel. Please come as soon as possible to handle the necessary arrangements. My hand froze around the phone. It felt like a string had been plucked in my head, buzzing for a second before going silent. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding steadily in my chest. The humidifier in the room puffed out white mist, and Jade's orange tabby cat jumped onto the foot of the bed, tilting its head at me. Ms. Bennett, are you there? I'm here. My voice was calmer than I expected. How did he die? The officer on the other end paused for 2 seconds, probably choosing his words carefully. Then he said something I'll never forget. Based on the scene, Mr. Carter was drinking and celebrating with a female companion when he became overly excited and suffered a heart attack. Paramedics were unable to revive him. We found red wine and some performance-enhancing drugs at the scene. He'd phrased it as politely as possible, but the meaning was clear. Where is the female companion? I asked. She tried to leave while paramedics were working on him, but hotel security stopped her. She's at the station now cooperating with the investigation. The officer paused. Ms. Bennett, would you be able to come in? Yes. I'll be right there. I threw back the covers, and only when my feet hit the floor did I realize I was shaking. Not from sadness, not from fear, just a cold, surreal feeling I couldn't name. I stood in Jade's bathroom washing my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I was barefaced, my skin glowing, no dark circles under my eyes. I looked better than I had in 3 years. I remembered how Ethan always said I wasn't polished enough, didn't dress well enough, wasn't feminine enough. But he'd probably forgotten that in the days when I stayed up late editing his legal documents and got up at 5 a.m. to make him warm oatmeal, I didn't even have 10 minutes to put on a face mask. I sent Jade a text. She came running out of the bedroom barefoot, toothbrush in hand, toothpaste foam around her mouth, staring at me. What did you say? He's dead. Heart attack. I hung up the towel. I need to go to the police station. Mia Bennett, you stop right there. Jade grabbed my arm, spraying toothpaste foam on my sleeve. That's your reaction? You're just going to go like that? Your husband is dead. That bastard. I know. I patted her hand and smiled. I tried to cry. Really, I did. But I just can't. Jade stared at my face for a full 10 seconds, then laughed. She laughed loud, then spat and said he deserved it. She didn't come with me to the station. I told her this was the final chapter of my life, and I wanted to see it alone. The East Side Police Station was small, its blue and white sign glinting in the morning sun. I pushed open the glass door. A young officer was on the phone, and he froze when he saw me, probably surprised that the next of kin had arrived so quickly and alone. Ms. Bennett, a middle-aged officer came out holding a folder. This way, please. He led me into a small office, poured me a glass of water, and sat across from me. Police officers see all kinds of deaths, but he said in 20 years on the job, he'd only seen a few cases like this. Mr. Carter checked into the Azure Hotel around 11 p.m. last night with a woman named Layla Voss. He opened the folder. They were drinking in the room, according to the hotel's order records. They opened a $6,800 bottle of red wine and ordered several dishes. Around 3 a.m., Layla Voss called 911, saying Mr. Carter had suddenly collapsed and lost consciousness. Paramedics found no signs of life when they arrived. The preliminary cause of death is a heart attack induced by excessive alcohol and emotional excitement. The medical examiner will confirm the exact cause. I listened quietly. Why? Thinking about that photo. Last night Layla had been celebrating their new beginning. Turns out it wasn't my new beginning, it was his. He must have been so happy. He forgot to take care of his own body. Where is Layla Voss now? I asked. The middle-aged officer cleared his throat. She's in the interrogation room next door. She's very upset. She keeps asking to see you. See me. I laughed. I thought I was the last person she'd want to see. The officer's expression grew even more awkward. He pulled a piece of paper out of the folder and handed it to me, a printed screenshot of text messages. He explained they'd been taken from Layla's phone as part of the investigation. I looked down. There were 3 screenshots. The first was a conversation between Layla and Ethan, dated 2 a.m. This morning. Ethan had written, "She'll be gone for good tomorrow. I'll change the locks. And you'll be the lady of the house." Layla had replied with a string of laughing emojis. "She won't make a scene, will she, Ethan? What could she possibly do? A woman who only got her job because of my connections. She's nothing." So in his eyes, my job at the law firm had been a gift from him. He'd probably forgotten that he'd begged me to quit my tenured government position back home and move to the city to build his career with him. I'd gotten that job on my own, passing the entrance exam without any help from him. But when he needed to put me down, suddenly he was my savior. The second screenshot was a conversation between Layla and another woman, saved under best friend. Layla had written, "That old hag is finally signing tomorrow. You know what he promised me? The house. It's in his dad's name. But he's the only son. It'll be mine eventually. Then I'll send that old man to a senior living community. And I'll run the place." The third screenshot was older. Another conversation between Layla and Ethan. "Layla, what did your wife make you today?" Ethan had sent a photo of the 4 dishes and a soup I'd made. Then replied, "Same old stuff. She makes the same few things over and over. Boring. Layla, when I move in, I'll make you something delicious every day." Ethan had sent a kissing emoji. "Hurry up. I can't wait." I handed the screenshots back to the officer. Only when my fingers touched the paper did I realize how cold they were. But my heart was calm. It was like an answer I'd been waiting for had finally been revealed. And all my questions made sense. He hadn't stopped loving me suddenly. He'd never loved me at all. 3 years of marriage had just been a waiting period for him. He'd been biding his time until someone better came along. I was just a bottle of water he'd bought while waiting for the bus, thrown away once he was no longer thirsty. "What paperwork do I need to sign?" I set down my glass and looked back at the officer. The middle-aged officer stared at me for 3 or 4 seconds, probably wondering if I was in shock from grief. But my eyes were steady. No sign of breaking down. He walked me through the process. Identify the body. Sign some forms. Notify both families. He said Ethan's parents were on their way, about an hour out. "I want to see Layla Voss," I said. The officer hesitated, then nodded. The interrogation room was brightly lit, the fluorescent bulbs humming softly. Layla was sitting in a chair, still wearing the silk nightgown from the hotel, a police jacket draped over her shoulders. Her makeup was ruined, her eyeliner smudged into black circles under her eyes, her hair a mess. She looked like she'd just been dragged out of a nightmare. The second she saw me, she jumped out of her chair and fell to her knees with a thud. "Ms. Bennett." She was sobbing hysterically, her voice high and hoarse. "Ms. Bennett, please. I'm begging you. Tell them I had nothing to do with his death. He took the drugs. He drank the wine. He got too excited on his own. I didn't hurt him. I didn't do anything." I looked down at her. This was the new beginning Ethan had thrown away 3 years of marriage for. Now she was on her knees in front of me, like a drowned rat, too pathetic to even keep her dignity. I remembered the photo of her sitting on his lap, holding that wine glass, seductive and arrogant. Now the bill for that wine had come due, and she couldn't even hold it. "Where's his money?" I asked. Layla froze, her sobs catching in her throat. I said, "Where's Ethan Carter's money?" I knelt down so I was eye level with her. The money in his account, the cards in his wallet, all the cash he had on him. "You had 20 minutes between when he collapsed and when the police arrived. You weren't trying to save him. You were going through his things, weren't you?" Layla's face turned pale. Inch by inch, I pulled my phone out of my bag, opened the banking app, and typed in Ethan's account number. I guessed his password on the third try, his usual combination, which included Layla's birthday. The transaction history showed that at 3:18 a.m. this morning, exactly $800,000 had been transferred from his account to an unknown virtual account. 3:18 a.m. The 911 call had been made at 3:23 a.m., which meant the second Ethan collapsed, the first thing Layla did wasn't call for help, it was pick up his phone, open the banking app, and steal his money. I didn't do it, Layla screamed, but her eyes gave her away, filled with so much fear and guilt they were almost overflowing. He did it himself. He transferred the money. It had nothing to do with me. He did it himself. I turned the phone screen toward her. You didn't even dare use your own account. You opened a virtual one just to receive the money. Layla, do you think the police are stupid? The middle-aged officer had come up behind me. He took my phone, looked at the screen, and his face hardened. He immediately grabbed his radio and called for another officer. 2 officers walked in and pulled Layla to her feet. What are you doing? Let go of me. Mia Bennett. You bitch. You set me up. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? You and your husband planned this together. Layla's screams echoed down the hallway, growing fainter until a metal door slammed shut behind her. The interrogation room fell silent. Only the hum of the fluorescent lights and my heartbeat remaining. The middle-aged officer looked at me, a subtle look of respect in his eyes. He'd probably seen hundreds of grieving family members break down in his station, but never a widow who could calmly pull up bank transfer records in the middle of it all. Ms. Bennett, did you suspect this? I shook my head honestly. I just figured a woman who'd sit on another woman's husband's lap would probably go for his wallet first when he dropped dead. He was silent for a moment, then said something that surprised me. Your ex-husband had terrible taste. I smiled and said nothing. A commotion erupted at the end of the hallway. Ethan's parents had arrived. Margaret Carter burst into the station lobby, her hair a mess. She was wearing a bright red winter coat, the color almost ironic. She'd always loved a good spectacle, throwing lavish banquets when her son became a lawyer, hosting parties for 3 days when he bought a house. She'd never dreamed the last event she'd planned for him would be his funeral. Where is my son? Where is he? Her voice was high and shrill. What did you do to my son? Harold Carter followed behind, his face pale with rage. He glanced at me standing in the hallway, his eyes cold, just like they'd been for the past 3 years. He'd always been politely distant, polite enough that you couldn't fault him, but distant enough that you knew you'd never be part of the family. Mia. He walked up to me, his voice low. Why was my son in a hotel? Why wasn't he at home? As his wife, where were you when he died in the middle of the night? I didn't answer. The middle-aged officer answered for me. Mr. Carter checked into the Azure Hotel last night with a female companion. The room was booked in her name. We have the registration and security footage. He paused, glancing at Harold. Also, according to hotel staff and security, after they entered the room, Mr. Carter repeatedly said things like, I'm so happy and this is a big day. Margaret's sobs cut off for a second, then erupted even louder. That's impossible. My son would never do that. He's a good boy. He's always been faithful to his wife. Someone set him up. Mom, I said. It was the first time I'd called her that in 3 years. And the last. The divorce papers he had his lawyer draw up are in his briefcase. They're dated yesterday. And that's his signature. You can check for yourself. My voice was soft. He was supposed to meet me at the Los Angeles County Clerk's office at 9 o'clock this morning. Today was supposed to be the day we got divorced. Margaret's face went rigid. I pulled a copy of the divorce papers out of my bag, something I'd grabbed on my way out last night. I handed it to her, her eyes fixed on the line that said husband, Ethan Carter. And her fingers began to shake. And there's this photo. I opened my phone gallery and pulled up the text from the unknown number. I got this last night. From his new girlfriend, celebrating our new beginning. Those are his words. Margaret didn't look at the phone. She stared straight at me, her eyes bloodshot, her lips trembling. Then she raised her hand to slap me. The slap never landed. The middle-aged officer grabbed her wrist. "Ma'am, this is a police station. Please control yourself." Margaret was pulled away, but her eyes never left me. Like a rusty knife digging into my skin, she probably wanted to ask me why I hadn't told her sooner, why I hadn't stopped her son, why as a wife I hadn't been able to keep my husband in line, but she couldn't ask. Because every answer would have been a slap in her own face. The good son she'd raised, the pride and joy she'd spoiled and praised his whole life, had died in another woman's bed. Killed by a $6,800 bottle of wine and a handful of dirty drugs. Another commotion erupted in the hallway. Layla was being brought back, and she ran straight into Ethan's parents. "It's her. It's that little bitch." Margaret had finally found someone to blame. She broke free from the officer and lunged at Layla. "You killed my son. You give me back my son." Layla was being held by two female officers, her hair falling in her face. But she wasn't going down without a fight. She ducked Margaret's slap and yelled even louder. "Don't you dare blame me. Your son chased me. He said he'd divorce you and marry me. He said he'd give me the house. You think I wanted to be with a divorced man in his 30s? If it wasn't for his money." Before she could finish, Harold slapped her across the face. Chaos erupted. A dozen officers crowded into the hallway trying to break up the fight. Margaret's sobs, Layla's screams, and Harold's roars mixed together like a pot of boiling garbage, stinking up the whole place. I stepped back and leaned against the wall, watching it all. 3 years ago, when I walked into the Carter house in my wedding dress, Margaret had put a gold bangle bracelet on my wrist and said I was her daughter now. Harold had raised his glass to all the guests and said Mia was the daughter-in-law he'd always wanted. I'd cried that day, thinking I'd married into a warm, loving family. I later learned that gold bracelet was gold-plated. It had tarnished within 6 months, and that daughter line had just been for show. In her eyes, I'd always been an outsider, a nanny to take care of her son, a live-in housekeeper to cook and clean for him, a doormat to support him while he built his career. Doormats aren't supposed to have opinions. So when I'd said I wanted to get a part-time master's degree in law, she'd said women don't need that much education, having children is what matters. When I'd come home late from work, she'd said a woman's place is in the home, not out working. Who was going to cook dinner and do the laundry? When Ethan started staying out all night, she'd said it's normal for men to have work events, and a good wife is understanding and forgiving. I'd always thought I just wasn't good enough, but today I finally realized the rule in that house had never been "Are you good enough?" It had always been "Are you one of us?" And I never had been. In the middle of the chaos, Margaret spotted me. She pushed past the people around her and stumbled toward me, the anger gone from her face, replaced by desperation. Mia, listen to me. My son is gone. He was our only child. You can't abandon us. You were our daughter-in-law for 3 years. You can't be this cruel." She grabbed my hand, her nails digging into my wrist. I looked down at her. This woman who'd once looked down on me, who'd always judged me with that critical eye, now looked like a tree broken by a storm, all her branches hanging down, reduced to nothing but survival instinct. She needed someone to lean on, someone to take care of the mess. And I was the only one she had left because her son was dead. Because the new daughter-in-law she'd been so excited about was in police custody. And because her husband couldn't do anything but slap people. "Mrs. Carter." I pried her fingers off my wrist, one by one. "The divorce papers say the house is mine. The car is mine. And I get 70% of the savings. I'll give all of that up." Her eyes lit up. "But I have one condition." I looked her straight in the eye, my voice soft but clear. 30,000 of the down payment on that house was mine. I let you put it in your name to save Ethan's face. Now that he's gone, I want you to tell the truth about where that money came from. Margaret's face fell. The house had been the secret between Ethan and me. 3 years ago, when we got married, the Carters had told everyone they'd paid the down payment on the house and put it in Harold's name. It made them look like they'd provided a home for their son. But the truth was, 30,000 of that down payment had come from my mother selling her house back home. The Carters had taken my money to make themselves look good, then locked my mother's hard-earned savings away in their name with a property deed. Only Ethan, Margaret, and I had known the truth. She'd taken my hand back then, her eyes teary, and said, "Mia, don't worry. This is a loan from me to you. The house will be yours eventually. It doesn't matter whose name is on it." I later learned what eventually meant. It meant after I'd given them grandchildren, taken care of the house, and waited for them to die, only then would they even consider putting my name on the deed. And even when Ethan was alive, that promise had been empty. Now that he was dead, I didn't expect the Carters to pay me back willingly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Margaret let go of my hand and stepped back, her eyes darting away. "Harold and I saved our whole lives for that down payment. It has nothing to do with you." I'd known she'd say that. I smiled and didn't argue. 3 years had taught me everything I needed to know about this family. In their eyes, everything I gave was expected. And everything they gave was a huge favor. Giving them 30,000 was my duty as their daughter-in-law. But asking for it back made me ungrateful and cruel. "That's fine." I put my phone back in my pocket and stepped back, putting distance between us. "Then we'll go to court. I still have my mother's bank transfer records from when she sold her house. And as for Ethan's other assets..." I paused and looked at Harold, who was standing there with a face like thunder. "Dad, sorry. Mr. Carter, how much do you know about all the undefeatable payments your son took over the years?" Harold's face turned white. I didn't say anything else. I turned and walked out of the police station. The sun was high in the sky now, casting a golden glow over the sidewalk. The air smelled like fried food from the farmer's market and crisp winter air. An old man was walking his dog across the street. And there was a long line at the steamed soup dumpling shop. Just another normal day. I stood on the steps for a minute and took a deep breath. Jade's car was parked across the street. She was leaning against the door waving at me, an unlit cigarette in her mouth. Her eyes red. She'd been crying. She'd always hated seeing me hurt, more than I hated it myself. I walked toward her, my steps light. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Dear Ms. Mia Bennett, our records show you are the sole legal heir to Mr. Ethan Carter's deposits and investment products. Please visit our branch at your earliest convenience with the necessary documents to process the transfer. Additionally, Mr. Carter purchased a life insurance policy 3 months ago with you as the sole beneficiary. The policy amount is $3 million. I stopped walking and stared at the text for a long time. 3 months ago. He must have already been planning the divorce by then. But he hadn't changed the beneficiary. Either he'd forgotten, or that lawyer's instinct had kicked and he could change it after the divorce. But if something happened to him before then, the money would go to his family. He'd never dreamed that something would happen, and that it would happen so soon. Jade honked the horn and leaned out the window. "You coming? My soy milk is getting cold." I put my phone away and walked toward her, a smile spreading across my face. "Yeah." I opened the passenger door, got in, and buckled my seatbelt. "Let's get noodles first. I'm starving." Jade glanced at me and started the car, shifting the unlit cigarette to the other side of her mouth. "Then what?" I thought for a second. "Let's get haircuts. A new look. And then we find a good lawyer." I reclined the seat, the sun streaming through the window onto my face. "I have some accounts to settle." Jade laughed. A big, happy laugh. She banged on the steering wheel, and the horn beeped, like it was putting an end to something. "That's the Mia I know," she said, as we drove away from the police station. I glanced in the rearview mirror at the blue and white door. Margaret was still standing on the steps, her bright red coat standing out against the gray background. She was hunched over, like a tree with its roots cut down, ready to collapse at any second. I didn't look back. I didn't let myself feel sorry for her. 3 years of marriage had taught me one thing. Kindness without boundaries is just cheap self-pity. Some people deserve everything you have to give. Others deserve nothing but to be left behind. Ethan Carter. Thank you for dying and making me see the truth. I'll take this inheritance. Jade slammed on the brakes and pulled over to the side of the road. I still had half a steamed soup dumpling in my mouth. $3 million. She yelled so loud the whole farmer's market could hear her. Ethan bought a $3 million life insurance policy with you as the beneficiary. Are you sure you read that right? I handed her my phone and kept eating my dumpling. Pork and scallion filling. Thin skin. Lots of soup. It burned the roof of my mouth when I bit into it. But that hot, alive feeling was addictive. I'd barely eaten street food in 3 years. Ethan had said it was dirty and beneath us. Margaret had said a respectable lawyer's wife shouldn't sit on the curb eating dumplings. Looking back, respectability was the most expensive chain I'd ever worn. It made me ask permission just to eat a dumpling. Jade stared at my phone, reading the text 3 times over, then looked up at me, her eyes shining. Mia, do you realize what this means? It means I can order wonton soup today. I waved at the food stall owner. Jade slapped me on the back so hard I almost choked on my dumpling. Be serious. $3 million. Plus the house. Plus the saving Siri financially independent now. Financially independent. I'd never even dared to dream those words. 3 years ago, when I quit my government job and moved to this city, I had $3,600 in my bank account. Then I got the admin job at the law firm, making a little over $5,000 a month. After paying the household bills, the car loan, and buying Ethan nice suits to keep up appearances, I barely had enough left for a decent lipstick. Ethan had been so generous, giving me $2,000 a month for household expenses, then putting every single bill in my name. The house isn't going to be that easy. I swallowed the last of my dumpling. It's in Harold's name. We'll have to go to court. And the Carters aren't going to give up without a fight. Why? Oh, you should have seen the way Margaret looked at me at the station like I'd robbed her family's grave. Jade scoffed and tossed my phone back to me. Then we'll fight them in court. Her son was cheating on you, hiding money, and died in a hotel bed with another woman. She has no right to that house. You should have thrown that photo in her face and showed her what a good boy her son really was. I didn't say anything. I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Sure enough, the Carters' lawyer called that afternoon. He introduced himself as Ryan Cooper. His tone was polite, but every word had a sharp edge. He said Ethan's parents had hired him to handle the estate, that the house was registered in Harold's name and not part of Ethan's assets, and that I should forget about it. As for the insurance money and savings, the Carters believed I had no right to inherit all of it, since we were about to get divorced. Mr. Cooper, please tell Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I said, standing on Jade's balcony looking at the bare sycamore tree below, my voice as steady as my fingers. I have complete bank records showing that $30,000 of the down payment on that house came from my mother selling her home, legally. That's a debt the Carters owe me. If they want to fight over the estate, I'll add that debt to the lawsuit. And as for whether I have the right to inherit, Ethan died before we got our divorce. Legally, I'm still his wife. And I'm the first in line to inherit. There was silence on the other end for a full 5 seconds. Ms. Bennett, I understand how you feel, but there's no need to take this to court. Mr. Cooper, you're mistaken. I cut him off. I'm not making a scene. I'm just telling you the facts. I edited over 1,000 legal documents for Ethan in 3 years. I'm not a lawyer, but I know the basics. If you don't believe me, we'll see you in court. After I hung up, I squatted down on the balcony and laughed until tears came to my eyes. I thought about all those nights I'd stayed up editing his documents, all the cases he'd won because of the research I'd done, the arguments I'd structured, the wording I'd fixed. He'd taken all the credit and all the money, then told everyone I was just a boring admin with no skills. Now he'd left me all his money when he died, and all the legal knowledge he'd taught me over 3 years was exactly what I needed to fight his family. Jade said it was karma. The next morning, I went to the bank with my marriage license. Ethan's death certificate, and my ID. I was helped by Claire Thompson, a manager in her 40s with wire-rimmed glasses, who spoke slowly and carefully. She went through all my documents, then looked up at me with a subtle look of sympathy. Ms. Bennett, Mr. Carter had $124,000 in deposits, plus 2 investment products totaling $60,000. She pushed a form across the desk to me. As his spouse, you are the first in line to inherit. However, if there is any dispute. There's no dispute. I pushed the signed form back to her. If his parents have a problem with it, they can take me to court. Claire stared at me for 2 seconds, then nodded. She'd probably seen hundreds of families fight over inheritances in her bank. She was probably surprised to see a young woman handling her husband's estate so calmly. A young teller next to her kept glancing at me. I knew that look: curiosity, judgment, wondering why I wasn't crying over my dead husband. I didn't explain. I didn't have to. No one has the right to tell you how to grieve. Some people wear their grief on their sleeve, showing it to everyone. Others swallow it down and deal with it alone. And in my case, I had to figure out if he was even worth grieving for first. The answer was no. My phone rang as I walked out of the bank. It was another unknown number. A young woman's voice came through, sweet and tentative. Ms. Bennett, this is Nora Voss, Layla's sister. I stopped walking. Layla's sister. That was the last thing I expected. What do you want? Ms. Bennett, my sister's still in police custody, and our family's going through a really hard time. My parents are beside themselves. Her voice was tearful, but it was too perfect, too practiced. I was just wondering. All of Mr. Carter's things. The bags and jewelry he gave my sister. Could we? I almost laughed. Her sister's boyfriend had died in her sister's bed, and she was calling to ask for his stuff. All those things were bought with Ethan's marital property. Legally, I have the right to get them back. My voice was calm. And tell Layla if she doesn't want to add theft to her list of charges, she'd better return that $800,000. Otherwise, I'll sue. The voice on the other end turned sharp. 800,000. What 800,000? My sister didn't take his money. Do you have proof? The police have proof. The bank has proof. The transfer records are ironclad. Why do you think they're holding her? I stood on the steps of the bank, the afternoon sun bright in my eyes. And before you call again, think about this: your sister took my husband's phone, guessed his password, and transferred that money. That's theft. Plain and simple. The line went dead. I put my phone back in my pocket and shook my head. It was absurd. That's how life works sometimes. Just when you think you've hit rock bottom, someone digs a hole and pushes you in deeper. But the difference was, before I would have panicked, struggled, begged for help, now I knew how to tie a safety rope on the way down. And that safety rope was me. At 3 p.m., I went to Ethan's law firm. The sign above the door had read Carter Associates Law Firm, the gold letters glinting in the lobby of the office building. I'd cleaned his office, organized his case files, and the herbal liver tonic I'd made for him was still in the break room cabinet. But I'd never had my own desk there. Ethan had said the work was too professional for me, that I should just stick to admin. I pushed open the glass door. The receptionist jumped, clearly having heard the news, her face filled with guilt and unease. Ms. Bennett. About Mr. Carter. I know. I smiled at her. Is David Parker here? David Parker was Ethan's partner, the other founder of the firm. When Ethan had started the firm, he'd been short on startup money. I'd given him every cent I had, $20,000. The partnership agreement said Ethan and David each owned 50%. My $20,000 had been listed as Ethan's personal contribution. David came out of his office. His face was complicated. And he saw me. He probably already knew what I was going to say. David, I just came from the bank. I sat down on the couch and set an envelope on the coffee table. I've inherited Ethan's deposits and investments, and according to the law, I inherit his 50% stake in the firm. David's face fell. But he didn't argue right away. He wasn't like Ethan. He was a practical man who knew when to pick his battles. Mia. This is complicated. He chose his words carefully. Running a law firm requires a license. You have legal experience, but you're not a lawyer. If we transfer the shares to you, it won't help the firm's operations. How about this? I'll buy you out at market value. Fine. I agreed immediately, which caught him off guard. But before we do that, I need to see the books. The books. Yes. All the firm's financial records, revenue, and dividend payments from the past 3 years. I want to see everything. I took a sip of the water the receptionist had brought me. All of Ethan's income during our marriage is marital property. I need to make sure he didn't hide or transfer any of it. If he didn't, we'll do the buyout at market value. If he did. I didn't finish the sentence, but David's face said it all. He was silent for a long time, then sighed. That sigh held both resignation and guilt. I didn't know how much he'd covered up for Ethan, but I knew he wouldn't risk legal trouble for a dead man's secrets. That's the thing about businessmen, they're loyal when you're alive, but when you're dead, it's all about the bottom line. Give me a week, he said. 3 days. I stood up and picked up the envelope. I'll be back in 3 days. With my lawyer. It was evening when I walked out of the office building. The sunset had painted the whole street orange. I stood on the sidewalk waiting for a rideshare driver. The wind was cold, so I pulled my coat tighter around me. It was a navy windbreaker Ethan had gotten from work last year. Unisex. He'd thought the color was ugly and given it to me. I'd worn it all winter without complaining. Back then, I'd thought saving him money was love. That making do with what I had was being a good wife. Looking back, making do is addictive. Make do once, and people think you'll do it again. Make do for a year, and they think you were born to make do. But real love is never about one person making all the sacrifices. My phone pinged. A text from the insurance company. The $3 million life insurance claim had been approved. It would be deposited in my account within 10 business days. I stood there in the wind, staring at the numbers on my phone, and suddenly I wanted to cry. Not from sadness, not from joy, just a mix of relief and hurt I couldn't name. 3 years, over 1,000 days and nights. I'd given him my youth, my pride, my everything, and all I'd gotten in return was a divorce paper that would have left me with nothing. And then he'd died. And a life insurance policy he'd probably forgotten to change had given me back everything I deserved. He'd paid his debt to me with his life. It was more final than any apology could ever be. Jade picked me up. I leaned back in the passenger seat with my eyes closed, and she turned down the music, thinking I was upset. Jade. I opened my eyes and looked at the streetlights coming on one by one. I want to go back home. See my mom. Of course. When? I'll take time off work and come with you. After all this is over. I want to buy back the house my mom sold. Jade glanced at me and smiled. Mia, you know what? She ruffled my hair. You look better now than you have in 3 years. I rolled down the window a crack. The cold winter wind blew in, carrying the sweet smell of roasted sweet potatoes from a street vendor. The traffic ahead was a river of red and yellow lights, each one heading home. I'd thought I had no home left, but now I knew home wasn't a house, wasn't a man, wasn't a property deed with someone else's name on it. Home was me. 2 months later, I bought back my mom's old house. The day I got the property deed was a beautiful sunny day. The shadow of the old Chinese scholar tree at the entrance to the neighborhood fell on the ground, dappled and broken, just like it had been 3 years ago when my mom had sent me off to get married. She'd stood under that same Chinese scholar tree back then, handed me a savings account record for $30,000, and said, "Daughter, I don't have much, but this is all I have. Be strong in your new family." That $30,000 had become the Carters' down payment, the name on the property deed, Margaret's line about how we paid for most of it. My mom had moved into her brother's old house and lived there for 3 years. She'd never complained once. When I put the new keys in her hand, her fingers shook. This strong woman had raised me alone after my dad died. Put me through college. Then sold her only house for me. She didn't cry when she took the keys. She just ran her fingers over them again and again, like they were a treasure she'd lost and found again. It's just like it used to be, I said. The living room still faces south. The bougainvillea you planted on the balcony is still there. The new owners didn't cut it down. It's just grown a little wild. Finally. My mom cried. She held onto the keys and rested her head on my shoulder, mumbling something I couldn't hear. But she was smiling. The house wasn't exactly the same anymore. 3 years had passed. The walls had been repainted. The floors replaced. The kitchen remodeled. But it was still in the same place. You could still see the farmer's market from the window. Still hear the tofu seller's bell at 6 a.m. Still smell the beef noodle soup from the shop downstairs drifting up to the 3rd floor. Those sounds and smells were still the same. They'd never changed. My mom said a house is all about location. If the location is right, everything else falls into place. I said yes. And people are the same. If you stand in the right place, everything else falls into place. When I got back from my hometown, I took Jade out for Japanese food. Halfway through the meal, she put down her chopsticks and stared at me. Mia. Honestly. How do you feel about all of it now? I thought about it for a long time. It feels like I just woke up from a 3-year fever, I said, picking up a piece of salmon. The fever's gone. My head's clear. And looking back at the things I did when I was sick makes me cringe. But it wasn't my fault. I just caught a virus. Jade laughed and clinked her sake glass against mine. That's perfect. Ethan Carter was the virus. Yeah, a really stubborn virus that attacks when your immune system is weakest. I dipped the salmon in soy sauce. When I first moved to this city, I had no friends, no family, no security. He showed up and filled all those holes. He was nice to me, so I was twice as nice to him. That wasn't love. That was gratitude. And now. I thought for a second. Now I think the bravest thing I ever did was not cry when I got that phone call about him dying in that hotel room. Outside the window, the night was dark. The city's neon lights reflecting on the glass. At the table next to us, a couple was taking photos. The girl was holding up her phone, and the boy was looking away, his ears bright red. I watched them for a minute, then looked away. I was smiling, not a sad smile, not a bitter smile, not a self-pitying smile, a light smile, a relieved smile. The smile of someone who'd finally walked out of the mud. My phone buzzed. My monthly bank statement. I glanced at it. The interest from the insurance payout was already more than I'd made in 6 months at my old job. Then I opened Ethan's old Facebook profile. I'd unfriended him. But I still had a backup of our message history. I'd never opened it. The last backup had been made the day before he died. I stared at his familiar profile picture for a second, then deleted the backup too. Jade noticed what I was doing and raised an eyebrow. Gone for good. Gone for good. I flipped my phone face down on the table. You're right. Don't leave garbage lying around. It attracts bugs. She laughed so loud the couple at the next table turned to look at us. It was late when we finished eating. Jade and I stood on the sidewalk waiting for our rid-a share driver. The cold wind blew off the river, carrying the smell of water and the distant sound of a ferry horn. I wrapped my coat tighter around me. It wasn't the navy windbreaker Ethan had given me. It was a new camel wool coat I'd bought for myself, sharp and tailored, making me feel put together. Jade nudged me with her elbow. Hey, what are you going to do next? Oh, I've got plans. I ticked them off on my fingers. First, get the money from the firm buyout. We're almost done with that. Second, remodel my mom's kitchen. She's been wanting a new one for years. Third. I paused. Third, I'm going to take the bar exam. Jade's eyes went wide. You're going to be a lawyer. Why not? I tilted my head at her. I worked at that law firm for 3 years. I handled more case files than some new lawyers. I know the law better than Ethan ever did. He spent 3 years telling me I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't do it. And I started to believe him. But now he's gone. And I realize I can. The wind blew my hair, and I tucked a strand behind my ear. That gesture made me think of the girl I'd been 3 years ago. The day I'd first moved to this city. That girl with the ponytail, dragging a beat-up suitcase, full of hope and fear. She walked through betrayal, humiliation, loss, and rebirth. And now she was standing here, in the wind by the river, and there was light in her eyes again. Jade's Mini pulled up. The driver rolled down the window and nodded at us. Jade opened the car door, then turned back to look at me. Mia, don't you think the universe handled this perfectly? I got in the car, buckled my seatbelt, and smiled at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The streetlights passed by one, and the city looked different to me now. 3 years ago, I'd seen it as a forest I had to fight to fit into, walking every path carefully, afraid of making a mistake. Now I saw it as a world of possibilities, with endless roads stretching out in front of me. Ethan Carter's sudden death had put an end to our marriage. He'd probably never imagined, as he collapsed, that the woman he'd thought couldn't live without him would not shed a single tear at his funeral, then use his life insurance money to buy back her mother's house. It wasn't that I was cruel. It was that he'd taught me the most useless thing in the world is to give your heart to someone who doesn't deserve it, then grieve for them when they're gone. I glanced down at the date on my phone. It had been exactly 62 days since he died. In those 62 days, Layla Voss had been formally charged with theft. The $800,000 had been frozen in the virtual account, and I'd filed a lawsuit against her. Margaret Carter had yelled at me one last time over the phone, and I'd never answered her calls again. David Parker had turned over all the firm's financial records. The amount he paid me for Ethan's 50% stake had left my mom speechless on the phone. And as for the house in Harold's name, once I showed them my mother's bank records and the contract from when she sold her house, the Carters had finally backed down, not because they'd had a change of heart, but because they knew they'd lose even more if we went to court. $3 million in insurance, plus the savings and investments, plus the money from the firm buyout. It was enough to take care of my mom for the rest of her life, enough to start over. Enough that one day I could stand in front of my own law firm and see my name on the sign. And it had all started with a man dying in the middle of a ridiculous celebration. Do I hate him? Maybe once, but mostly I feel lucky. Lucky he died the day before we were supposed to get divorced. Lucky he never got around to changing the beneficiary on that insurance policy. Lucky the universe didn't side with him in the end. The day before our 3rd wedding anniversary, he'd given me divorce papers. The next day, he'd given me his life. Some people are a curse when they're alive, and some people are a blessing when they die. Ethan Carter. Thank you for the inheritance, and thank you for finally leaving my life.